today's conference, Morning Star Autumn Conference. My name is Ros Foyer from Unite Scotland, and I've got the pleasure of chairing today's proceedings. And as you know, the theme of today's conference is redeveloping class politics. But before we launch into any of today's business, I'd actually like to ask you if we could have a minute's silence and just have a mark of respect to our good comrade Alan MacKinnon. His sad passing has been marked in a number of ways, but it would be remiss not to mark it here, given you know, he was the heart of activities in the peace movement in Scotland, the wider political movement in Scotland, and this was very much his home, his political home. So if I can ask you all to be upstanding, and we'll just have a minute's silence. Thanks very much, comrades. I'm going to move on and introduce Carolyn Jones from the Institute of Employment Rights.
Institute of Employment Rights, yeah, thanks very much. Well, I'll stand. I'm probably difficult enough for you to understand, coming with a completely different accent, so I'll stand and you can watch me lips move and see if it gets through. Thanks for the invitation to come up here. It's always a pleasure to come up to Glasgow. And I'm proud to be at a Morning Star, Scottish Morning Star event. You are an inspiration, the Scottish Morning Star. In Merseyside, we've tried to compete with you. We can't out-conference you, we can't out-organise you. So our focus has been on following what a Chilean politician once said, and that is that socialism can only arrive by bicycle. So in Merseyside, we've been organising annual bike rides in a way to raise money for the Morning Star. And it seems to have caught on, because somebody else has got on their bike and taken socialism to a wider group of people, and well done for Jeremy Corbyn for doing just that. So maybe it's a trend that we're setting, hopefully. As Ros said, my title is Today's Challenges to the Politics of the Working Class, and I'm glad that we started by talking about the media and the Morning Star, because of course one of the biggest challenges to the politics of the working class is the media. We all know that certainly English papers, 60% of the media owned by just two families. And the DNA of those families are in the ruling class, and we've seen it. It's been rabid, the response to the Jeremy Corbyn success. They just can't. Marx said that the ideology of the ruling class is the ruling ideology, and they are desperately trying to make the ruling ideology sound like common sense, sound like Corbyn is some kind of other planet, and that is just going to get worse and worse as we go on. So I was very pleased. I sit on the management committee of the Morning Star, and last Saturday we were reported that sales of the paper are, let me have a look, 15% up. We're over 50% reached our target of 1,000 new readers for the Morning Star. We've got over 250,000 followers on Twitter, so social media, yes. And we've had over 1.5 million impressions on Twitter. Now, I haven't got a clue what that means, but 1.5 million sounds good to me, so I'm sure it can only be going in the right direction. And that's very important, not least because last year, the Gagging Act, you remember, was introduced, which stopped what a lot of us could do. It certainly stopped what the Institute of Employment Rights as a charity can do in terms of how we campaign. There are severe restrictions on the money we can spend and what we can do. The only voice in society that isn't gagged by the Gagging Act is the media. They can say what they want. There's nothing that controls them. And so having a piece of the media that speaks up for the labour movement and speaks up for socialism is crucial. So all I can say there is buy it, read it, share it. I'm sure I'm talking to the conversant, but help the growth and go all out for the 1,000 new readers if the Star is going to survive. So that's the first challenge to working class politics, the media. The second challenge, of course, is the austerity agenda being led by the finance sector down in London. It means, well, I don't need to tell you, it means inequality in the UK is now at its highest levels since records began. It also means that top bosses are now earning 183 times more than the average full-time worker. It doesn't make economic sense. We know it doesn't make economic sense, austerity. There's not an economist in the world who will speak out and say austerity is working. So why does the narrative persist? Well, it persists because the rich are gaining from it, and they're not going to give it up without a challenge. And the problem has been there hasn't really been a challenge, not in the political scenario. So the Labour Party, the official opposition, wasn't there. It bought in just as much as the Conservative politicians, and that's where we got the discrepancy between the hate that people were feeling and the politics that was getting spouted at Parliament. That's now changing, of course. The tide is turning. Austerity, the anti-austerity agenda is now popular. So whether it's Greece, whether it's Spain, whether it's Ireland, whether it's Portugal, or whether it's here now, the anti-austerity message is very much getting through. And in fact, as Ros just said, what an image of John McDonnell, the shadow chancellor of the country. We now have the anti-austerity message right at the heart of the political establishment. So the challenge, of course, for us is to make sure that his arguments become a reality. His hope that he is talking about becomes a reality. And that's not going to be easy. The Tories are very clever. I was watching Cameron on the television this morning, and they are clever. They have tactics, and they've got it seems to me, three kinds of manoeuvres. First of all, they appease, then they restrain, and then they attack. That seems to me to be their class warfare approach to where we are. So appeasing. Party of the working class, marvellous. They constantly talk about representing the working class and being the people. They've even now, we believe, set up their own trade union centre. Great, I'll be there. So they appease by talking the language that they think will, and unfortunately, a lot of people may believe it, and our job is to expose the unreality of what the Tories are saying. So they appease, first of all, with their kind words, then they restrain, and we will talk about both the Trade Union Bill and the European Union. Both of them are going to restrain not only what we can say and do, but also what a future Labour government may be able to do under the terms of the European Union, and then the attack. Because, of course, the reason for the Trade Union Bill is to remove, as Ros says, the voice and the opposition to the austerity argument, which is the trade union movement. And once they've done that, then they go for our jobs, they go for our pay, and they go for our pensions. Tory austerity breeds despair and destitution, which in itself leads to division, fear and the politics of hate. And one of the challenges that we have is to turn that fear and division into anger and into unity. And the best way to challenge that kind of fear and insecurity is through the cadres of the organised working class, which is the trade union movement. Some wonder whether we can do it. Yes, our numbers have fallen. So 13 million in 1979. Nevertheless, we are still 6.5 million strong. And when you think about it, 6.5 million strong, that's nearly 10 times more members than all of the political parties put together. So to suggest that we haven't got the power to resist what's happening, to suggest that we all just fall into some kind of despair and fight between ourselves is ridiculous. We have got the strength. Sometimes we undermine it or we don't believe in it, but our strength is in our numbers, and we need to give people that sense of confidence that they can use their numbers to resist. The Tories never underestimate us, and that's why they have put the Trade Union Bill on the agenda. And of course, that's the third challenge to us, or to the politics of the working class, the Trade Union Bill. It's been called the biggest attack on trade unions in a generation. It is clearly Thatcher's unfinished business. The TUC have called it unnecessary, undemocratic and unfair. That's what they say. We would say it's more of a declaration of class war against our people. It has to bring out the killer instinct. We have to have more. I know Jeremy's talking about nice and polite politics, but there has to be a killer instinct to resist the trade union onslaught. That's why when we set up our campaign, Kill the Bill, publications here if you want them, we were told off by the TUC, don't say kill the bill. You know, it's not very nice. We can't kill it. Well, for two reasons. One, they didn't like kill the bill, and two, they thought there might be room to manoeuvre to amend the trade union bill. Well, our position is it's nothing. You cannot make the trade union bill better by fiddling around the edges. It's like TTIP. It's not going to change. It's all or nothing. And actually, that consent against the bill seems to have gained ground. So what is the bill doing? Well, there's three aspects to it. There's political, there's industrial and there's organisational. By now, you'll all have read, and I'm sure you know the details. And although you said I was going to go into detail, I mean, how many of you don't know about the tax on the political fund, the attacks on the use of social media? So I won't. If you want detail, it's in the publication. There's also an excellent 20-minute video on our website by John Hendy and Keith Ewing, who can do it far better than me, which explains and outlines the content and the implications of the trade union bill. So do please read that and watch that. But political. They don't like the voice of trade unions, and so they're attacking the political funds. As you know, we're now going to have to opt in, which we estimate will reduce the funds that trade unions will have, not just to pay the Labour Party, but also to campaign around things like saving the NHS or raising the living wage or anti-academy campaigns. We reckon the opting-in process will cut our funding by at least 2/3. It did in Ireland, and we suspect it will be the same here. It takes us back to a similar piece of legislation introduced after the general strike in 1926, when a vindictive government said, we're going to take away the money, we're going to take away your financial security and your ability to campaign. And so they introduced a very similar piece of legislation, which lasted until about 1946. It means the Tories are taking us back to the general strike era, when it was and their vindictive attitude towards trade unions. It also individualises the process, because, of course, you opt in as an individual as opposed to part of a collective. We will be challenging that because, according to the ILO Convention 87, you have a right to associate as a collective. So the Institute and our experts we've already put in a legal challenge to the Committee of Experts to say a lot of this legislation is not fit for purpose. But worse, it also cuts the political, the finances available for opposition. I can't remember the time when a party in government so fundamentally attacked the funding basis of an opposition party. Documents from 1984 show that when this was raised with Thatcher, Thatcher said she couldn't possibly do it. It was a little bit too extreme. She couldn't do it, she said, because she thought it would lead to discontent on the streets. So now we've got not only going back to 1926 and the vindictive attitude towards the trade unions, but also to something that even Thatcher rejected in 1984. So more extreme than Thatcher is a bit of a banner to have around Cameron's neck. And as a worse thing, this bill is it's just past its second reading. It's now in committee stage. We think that there's going to be further amendments. There's a stalking horse that Keith Ewing talks about, and that is that in 2011, the Kelly Committee said that not only should people have to opt in to the political fund, but they should also say which party that political fund should be spent on. Now, watch out for that kind of amendment coming through from the Tories as it goes through committee stage. How would the unions feel about being a collection agent for UKIP, for the BNP, for the Tory party? They're outrageous in their proposals, and it really needs to be stopped. The second aspect of the trade union bill is on industrial and the right to strike. don't forget that the UK already has the most restrictive laws on trade unions in the Western Wales. So this is just another, and when you add another, the cumulative approach to restraining trade unions is abysmal. There's something called the Gulliver concept, which kind of it encourages multiple legal restrictions, one tiny little rope around one after the other, until you wake up one day and you can't move because you're covered in these tiny little legal restrictions that stop you doing. And it's that cumulative approach that is the most dangerous thing about the bill. How are they doing it? Well, we've got ballot thresholds, we've got notice periods raised from 7 days to 14 days, we've got restrictions on picketing. Again, I won't go into it. There was an excellent article in the Morning Star this weekend from Hendy and Ewan where they posed just 15 questions on the picketing. How's it going to be done? How is it going to be policed? How is it going to be enforced? The idea that pickets have to give name not only to the employers but to the police. There's a book outside on blacklisting. We know what the collection of data on trade unionists means and how it is used. Again, it needs to be resisted, because restricting the right to strike, well, Hendy has a saying that says if you collective bargaining without the right to strike just equals collective begging. And that's the process that we're getting towards. If unions can't go out on strike and use their last power to control and restrain the imposition of lower terms and conditions by employers. And of course, the code of practice is now going to be not just a voluntary code, but a legal code, so that if you break it, you become criminalised. So the more popular a dispute is, the more they're going to make criminals out of pickets. Again, it needs resisting, and while Unite have been talked, there's no detail yet of how we're going to resist, because I suppose you don't want to show your tactics up front, but I am sure that there will be a lot of resistance to many of the restrictions on pickets. I'd say one other thing, and that's about the agency workers, because as I say, we already have the most restrictive laws in the Western Wales, and yet if you even succeed on getting around all those restrictions, then an employer can just bus in agency workers to break the strike. How divisive is that in its nature? And remember, agency workers, I was at a construction section meeting for Unite the other day, and they said, well, most of our workers are agency workers anyway, so we will all just strike. But you see changes in the benefit system, and how those on benefits are being forced to take jobs of any sort, whether it's on 0 hours, whether it's voluntary work, or whether it's going into work for an agency, who then gets used to bus in to break the strike. That's the danger of some of the legislation. And thirdly, in terms of the bill organisational, they are, as you know, ending check-off and resisting facility time. Again, to weaken the financial security of unions and undermine the organisational base. And why? Why? When you think about it, there's only 0.8 million days lost in strike action, and yes, there's over 28 million days lost by injuries and accidents at work. And the people who stop those injuries and accidents at work happening are the health and safety shop stewards on the floor, the bottom rung, the lifeblood of the trade union movement organising in the workplace, who, when they prevent 50% of the accidents, and yet they're the people who are going to have their facility time restricted in the workplace by these new proposals. We've been here before, of course. I know you're going to talk about the past and the future. We've been here before. The 1971 Industrial Relations Act was brought in on the back of a Labour government prepared to sell out the working class for an incomes policy. They lost the election, and a Tory party was brought in, who then brought in the Industrial Relations Bill and the Industrial Relations Act. That bill got through, but it was in the end defeated by mass action and opposition, by refusing to register and do the bureaucratic restrictions that the Act imposed on trade unions. I think this bill will get through as well because, as you say, they've got a majority in the House. It's not selling out to suggest it might get through, but whether it gets through or not, implementation and enforcement of the Act can still be resisted, and I'm pleased to see that resistance has grown. So the Scottish are resisting it. There was a very strong statement put out by the Welsh Government saying that they're not going to enforce the Act if it becomes law. There's a number of councils around England who are already saying that they won't enforce. The Police Federation have come out against it, the CIPD have come out against it, a lot of the police commissioners are saying that they're not going to enforce it. So there is a lot of unity against this legislation, and Mark Zawaka from PCS said the first time there is a dispute we all have to be there to support it. Len McCluskey has said we're not going to be restricted by bad laws. So I get a sense, you say a lot of things are moving, I get a sense that there is unity around this and we can resist this bill and we can derail the Act if it actually goes on the statute book, and that's what we ought to be fighting for. I know that we're running out of time, but there is another challenge that I'd like to just touch on, and that is the European Union. Because if we turn beyond the UK to look at Europe, and it follows on neatly from the discussion about the trade union bill, because attacks on trade unions and attacks on collective bargaining are not just coming through thin air. If we look around the country, this is a coordinated and strategic attack on the role of unions, not just in this country but throughout Europe. The aim of Europe is to impose austerity, to shrink the state and to cut public spending. The road from social Europe that too many trade union leaders are still clinging to, down to TTIP that takes away all of your rights, and democracy and responsibility has been fast and downhill all the way. Europe is no longer the provider of rights and protectors of freedoms that too many in our movement still believe in. It is a neoliberal prison with austerity and labour market reforms locked in to its very system. Treatment of Greece, I think, has opened people's eyes to where we go on Europe. It's supplanting democracy, it's imposing austerity, and I think the debate is moving on. Certainly in the Institute, we're joining together with CLASS, with the Campaign for Trade Union Freedom, with War on Want, and a number of other the People's Assembly, to have a big European Union debate on whether it's good or whether it's bad. If we're talking straight politics, you know where my politics will be, I'll be out. Just as you can't tinker with the trade union bill, you can't tinker with the European constitutions. It's not going to change. Europe is in a new world order. It's about red tape, it's about flexicurity, it's about agency workers driving down and institutionalising casual work. Since 2008, the Troika have roamed around the world imposing restrictions on those countries who are facing economic problems, not because they've overspent on public sector, not because they're paying nurses too much. Those countries who've bailed out their banks and who are facing financial difficulty now have the Troika then move in and start setting down their terms. Every intervention has been seized as an opportunity to impose structural adjustment programmes and austerity. Then there was the structural reform since 2011 and the Stability and Growth Pact. The end of it is the EU is being used to reform labour markets and in particular decentralise collective bargaining. And when Cameron says he's going around Europe to renegotiate, all that means for us is the worst of both worlds. It means we'll stay in Europe with the financial institutions, the only bodies that are saved, and yet we won't have any of the employment rights that are allegedly still there. And if you can't get those employment rights removed, he will just opt out of the social chapter. So, summing up, or no, moving on. There are a number of challenges that we face as we go into an election in 2020. When the Tories won in May, there was a widespread feeling amongst the Labour movement, and certainly amongst our people at the Institute, that the Labour Party was going to be out, not for 5 years, but for at least 10 years and maybe more. Now you get a sense that that has changed, that there is a sense of hope and confidence and belief that things can change. I'm not saying that it's going to be easy. We know that the Blairites are still circling like vultures, waiting to pounce on anything that goes wrong. And we know it'll be difficult because the Tories are already playing around with the electoral register. Eve, just in Glasgow, 70,000 people are going to be lost from the electoral register. And we know which side those voters might have been voting on, given a chance. So Corbyn has changed the political landscape, but we need to harness the feelings of anger, passion and hope that he brings into the debate as we go to the next election. And Ros mentioned registering people. Yeah, there's 40,000 people who didn't vote who we need to get on to the electoral register and widen the support for a socialist progressive policy government. And that means, as Ros says, taking the challenge out to public communities. If I hadn't been here, I'd have been in Manchester. We have a big rally there against the trade union bill. I think that will be massive. The People's Assembly have a week of action against, so everything the Tories say, there will be an alternative voice saying what the reality is. So I think that will be a very effective campaign. I believe we have the arguments, we have the weapons, and we certainly have the numbers. Corbyn said in his speech that it's time to stir up divine discontent. Well, that's not hard. I think discontent is out there. Capitalism is digging its own grave. Austerity is an economic failure. New Labour, I think, have been officially dumped. And the EU is exploding on itself in terms of its attitude to some of its member countries. So if we stand together, if we march together, if we strike together, I believe we can change things. That is the challenge for us today. I think we should seize the moment and face that challenge for the future. Thanks.